Hello, and thank you for watching our webinar on the Community Planning Grant Program. My name is Mackenzie Bell, the Senior Community Grants Coordinator, and I'll be presenting with Felipe Zamberlini, the Manager for the Community Assistance Unit. Felipe, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and welcome, folks, to today's presentation. First and foremost, let me walk you through a brief agenda. We're going to be talking today about what the Community One Stop for Growth is, specifically going more in depth about the Community Planning Grant Program. We're going to be talking, of course, about where does the Community Planning Grant Program fit into One Stop, some important parameters for you to keep in mind as you think about your projects, and as well as our scoring rubric, which will go into how to be competitive, of course, and some good examples of some successful applications in previous fiscal years. We'll be talking a little bit more about how to complete the full application and sharing some key dates that are coming up as well. First and foremost, you are coming through the Community One Stop for Growth to apply for the Community Planning Grant Program. As some of you are likely aware, since you may have applied in the past, but for those of you who are first timers to the One Stop, it is a single application portal where 12 different applications from Executive Office of Economic Development, Mass Development, and the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities come together to really collaborate and streamline your experience so that we can better coordinate efforts and deliver better results for you, communities, and other entities throughout the Commonwealth. I'll pass on back to Mackenzie for her to talk a little bit more about the program itself.
Yes, so diving into the Community Planning Grant Program, an overview. I will be your point of contact as the program staff. You see my email listed there, mackenzie.bell@mass.gov. The purpose of the Community Planning Grant Program is really to fund a variety of activities related to community planning. So this could be creating a community plan, doing a zoning revision, or planning for housing. And funds can support direct community engagement efforts. It could also produce a planning and zoning document, which could be in draft, phased, or final product form. All Massachusetts municipalities, regional planning agencies, and related municipal entities are eligible to apply for this program. Where does this program fall within the One Stop? On the development continuum, you see that it falls squarely within planning and zoning. Right there, we have our community plans, zoning revisions, and planning for housing. So some important project parameters. I do want to point you to the fact that our guidelines are published on the website. That is a great first stop to thoroughly recognize, but as some quick key points about this program, we'll start with the project budget. So awards for single entities are limited up to $150,000. Awards over this amount, we will only consider for joint or regional applications on a case-by-case basis. And although no local cash match is required, note that applications with at least a 10% local match get bonus points during the application review. The Community Planning Grant is a 2-year grant. For fiscal year 25, that means we will announce awards this fall in 2024, and projects must be completed by the end of fiscal year 2025, that's June 30th, 2026. As mentioned earlier, activities for the use of funds for this grant program include community plans such as a master plan, a housing production plan, a regional plan. It can cover zoning revisions and reviews, including zoning revisions to comply with Section 3A, the MBTA Communities Law, and planning for housing, which could include, for example, a housing site master plan, a housing feasibility plan. Unfortunately, these grant funds cannot be used to reimburse staff time or training, and note that any applicants with locally adopted growth limitations or housing or infrastructure moratoria are ineligible. How to be competitive. Again, I direct you back to our guidelines that has thorough information, but we'll point out a couple of key questions. Before beginning your application, consider whether this project is best achieved as a full project within the one grant cycle, those 2 years, or is it better to take a phased approach? Our guidelines also include the scoring rubric, how we grade or score applications during application review. Really take a look at that rubric and consider how can you maximize all possible points. And while the score is important, we also take regional diversity, previous support from the agency, first-time grant recipients, and other priorities that align with the secretary into account when determining awards. A full application, of course, needs all questions answered, but I'll point your attention to a few here. Under project need, we're really looking for you to show us, not just tell us, what the need is specifically for your community. For example, we know housing is a crisis pretty much everywhere, right? So if it's a planning for housing, for example, really show us, not just tell, what the need is to your community. For community engagement plans, we're looking for robust plans that clearly have a path to implementation. How is this really going to get accomplished? In the progress to date question, please make sure to include any descriptions of recently implemented local ordinances or bylaws that directly impact this project. That could be very important for us to consider. And lastly, when determining project impacts, try to provide your best estimates for housing outcomes as much as possible. We know, for example, that it can be really difficult to estimate outcomes for a zoning revision, but use your judgment, make your best estimates for potential housing outcomes. Expected attachments for applications to the community planning grant program are likely going to be a consultant cost estimate and a project location map at the very least.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Well, let me walk you all through 3 good examples of projects that came through the One Stop in previous rounds of the Community Planning Grant Program and the One Stop, and just give you some highlights of what made the project successful. So first and foremost, we have Franklin. Franklin applied for a zoning review. They were going to do a zoning audit and go through a robust engagement process to come up with amendments to their zoning bylaws to modernize it. Now, their application itself really did exactly what Mackenzie was talking around, showing and telling us what the work needed to be done. And that came very evident through both their documented evidence of progress to date. They had documents to showcase the need for this to happen. And they had a very detailed scope of work that talked specifically about how they were going to go about doing the work, not just saying how we're going to do it, but really showing us how they were going to go about doing the work. Clear leadership with a proven track to actually get the job done and get the project completed. This is important so that we can have an idea that your project is going to be accomplished and there might not be as many challenges as perhaps you might otherwise have. Project feasibility within the timeline is also very important. This just goes back to what Mackenzie said about a phased approach or a complete approach. Sometimes all you need is 1 fiscal year and 1 fiscal year and a half to get everything done. Other times you kind of need to phase it out, recognizing that you may need to come back to the One Stop and ask for additional funding, although not guaranteed. Like Mackenzie said, we do support projects that are previously funded on a regular basis. And of course, making sure that the project was feasible and defensible cost-wise. So it can't be something that's just an outrageous amount of money that it's maybe for the whole grant fund that's available or for way above the maximum that's allowed and without a reasonable explanation as to why. And oftentimes, just like Mackenzie said, we have a limit for our single entities and we can only go above the limit for joint applications or regional applicants. Franklin did a pretty good job. They actually already completed the work and folks can learn more about the project online as well. Another example was Leverett in FY23. They were going to be doing a phased approach. They were completing phase 2 of developing their comprehensive plan. This application did a very good job in really being clear about their local needs. That's really important. You don't want to just try to meet what the grant is looking for. You want to tell us what your local needs are. That is going to be pivotal in the successful application. Their commitment to date really talked about their efforts as a phased approach and how they intended to complete this in a meticulous and really thought out manner. And of course, their objectives were very well articulated in making sure that they could tell us that there was an implementation path and that it was very clear to be able to move forward. Last but not least, a pretty unique plan, which was a regional plan by SERPED in FY24. This is still ongoing. This was for activities to comply with Section 3A, the MBTA Communities Law. So clearly they were looking at local needs for the MBTA communities that they support in their region. A very collaborative project. That was a really unique perspective as well. They also demonstrated their commitment to date through the continuity of similar projects. SERPED has been doing this kind of activity around supporting MBTA communities, and this was an expansion of that work. They were really ready to get the job done and get it going forward. So that was a really important component for them to highlight that although it's not a building per se, they were quote unquote shovel ready. They were really ready to go out there and do the work on the communities that needed the most. Of course, they also had a very robust community engagement and implementation plan. This is key. Community engagement and implementation plan is not just one catch-all thing. You need to have a community engagement plan and an implementation plan. Those are two very important and distinct matters to have, and SERPED did a very good job explaining that. And of course, coming to expectations and outcomes as well, they very clearly outlined how this would help those MBTA communities comply with the MBTA Communities Law. Now, last but not least, when it actually comes to the application, make sure that you're going in Section 2 for the full application, and to be reviewed by the Community Planning Grant Program, you're going to select Planning and Zoning for the Development Continuum category. You may select Community Plan, Zoning Revision, or Planning for Housing for the purposes of being considered for the Community Planning Grant Program. And then, of course, select the most appropriate project focus type for your project. And through that way, we'll be able to review your application. And of course, you can learn more about both the timeline that's coming up with the One Stop, as well as opening additional webinars and guidances and seeing the application itself at mass.gov/one stop.
All right, thanks, Felipe. Let's take a look at some dates, timelines as we wrap up our webinar. We are currently in the full application and expression of interest phase right now. So you can access the full application right now. You may not submit until May, but you can access and start drafting that full application. The expression of interest phase will officially open or has opened on February 9th. You can submit expression of interest for projects to get feedback on, but also do take advantage of those other webinars. Note that we are going to be holding office hours for each program for more information as well. As I mentioned, full applications can be submitted as early as May. The full application deadline, take note, is 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, June 5th. That will then kick off program review. Programs review applications, and as Felipe discussed, the Community One Stop for Growth is also a collaborative review, and ultimately decisions on awards will be made around September of this year. So take another look at all of the optional guidance we have available. That expression of interest form can be submitted. Check out the recorded webinars and come to live office hours for any and all questions. The Community Planning Grant Program office hours will be held on Monday, March 11th at 12:30 p.m. Thanks so much, and be in touch if we can answer any questions as you consider a Community Planning Grant Program application this year.